the biggest problem with trauma, or we call it the stages of grief, is change. Suicide rate is twice the homicide rate. I was so shocked to learn that.
Welcome to Veteran Voices, SITREP, with your hosts, Tom and Chris Faust.
Welcome to Veteran Voices. I am Tom Faust, here with my son and co-host Chris. As always, the views expressed on this podcast are not necessarily the views of Veteran Voices, but you never know, they might be. Today we have a special guest, Dave Dittamore, who I would call a veterans advocate. We'll see if he agrees with that term. We met about a month or so ago in Tacoma, Washington, while I was attending a veterans resource fair, and he had a table there. So, David, welcome. We talked at that time and discussed various issues about veteran homelessness and suicide and the difficulty of reaching out and helping people. And you had some ideas and some things that you work with, and that's kind of what we'd like to discuss today. First, can you go ahead and just give us some background about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It was a pleasure meeting you at the Veterans Resource Fair. That was a great thing to help veterans. I grew up in Kansas, engineer for the phone company. Moved out here in the Northwest in 98 and worked for the Utilities Commission here for a few years and retired in 2004. And 2 marriages and 2 divorces. This is kind of interesting. But I am interested in music, play French horn in a couple of different organizations and sing in a choir. Am a member of Veterans for Peace. Am a Vietnam veteran, Navy, Supply Depot Da Nang 6970 and USS O'Callahan 6970. But am concerned about veterans issues. But I was mentioning to Tom, I will probably talk more about my divorce recovery weekend. It really changed my life. I had, I guess, an okay growing up, but kind of a loveless family. Didn't do too well with the women or whatever. Married when I was about 30 and divorced about 13 years later. But went this divorce recovery weekend and actually realized that I was okay. Learned that I could speak the truth and it would be all right and not be judged. But I want really to reach out to the veterans, especially those young people transitioning from the military, the very structured life, everything's kind of under control. You get out in the real world and what am I going to do? And the one thing I learned that the biggest problem with trauma, or we call it the stages of grief, is change. And you're going through a big change in your life. And so I want to talk to you about how we can manage that and maybe control it a little bit, to give yourself maybe 6 months kind of a target, to get some things discovered, maybe make a pact with your parents to stay at home for a little while until you get things figured out. And not just the first job, it's okay to go down and get a job flipping burgers, but think about a career. A couple things I'll mention is called a skills inventory and an interest inventory, which you can find online like everything else and probably free. They'll ask you about 100 questions. Would you rather be a lifeguard or a dentist or a tennis instructor or a plumber? And after you do that with artificial intelligence or whatever, they'll give you a list of 10 or 15 ideas of things that might fit for you. Maybe things you'd never thought about before. Maybe never seen a weatherman on TV. I've never dreamed, well, should I be a weatherman? But and maybe find something you'll be really good at, something you'll enjoy for 20 or 30 or 40 years. Better than just flipping burgers. Although I won't put down flipping burgers. Maybe they'll like you. Maybe they want to make you team head of that establishment may be a good career for you. But the main thing is let your life settle down. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. We got a few wars going on, and I hear we have a hurricane coming in, forest fires, a bunch of other stuff. But it's interesting to keep track of that, but just worry about yourself for a while until you get on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And one of the things you said, what can I do? I think that's a question that we like to talk about on here, because transitioning from military to civilian life, sometimes the skills that you earned in the military are transferable to civilian life, and sometimes they're not. Or even if they are, maybe it's not what you want to do. And so I think your skills assessment is a great idea.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is you've been in the military and structured, with your group, your platoon, or your whatever, and chances are you're coming back home, and you've been gone for 2 years, 4 years, or whatever, and probably all your high school friends have scattered to the wind, although some may be there, but now they're married, and you kind of say, well, what can I do? And Tom and I were talking a little bit earlier about, video games. Okay, I'm really tempted to, get in the video game world or the online world or whatever. But you need to leave the house and get out and find some new activities. I know here in the Seattle metro area, they have great things for veterans, scuba diving programs or things with horses, which I never would have dreamed of with being a Kansas boy, because I was never a cowboy. But I guess it's special bonding you can have with a horse. Of course, the other thing you've probably heard of is these service dogs that are great companions, very comforting, and even maybe just a regular dog, because I understand the service dogs are hard to come by. But companionship, friendship, to be honest with you, I'm looking for a female of the opposite species to come into my life, and may not get it automatically, but maybe just have a friend of the opposite sex. But the main thing is someone to talk to. And of course, the other alternative is a journal, to write down your feelings, to help you get over some of these things.
Yeah. So we can kind of go in on kind of like a perspective thing. So yeah, all these things are kind of good, but what is your perspective on, potentially why veterans are at a higher risk of, facing these kind of issues as opposed to the general population?
Well, besides what we call testosterone poisoning that us men suffer from, but I think a lot of the mentality in the military is the army of one, that I'm okay, give me my rifle, I'm going to take on the world, which sounds great, but I would say it kind of leads to tunnel vision, that you can say, I've got a problem here. Gee, I don't know of any answer. What can I do? And it's very tempting to look at a bad solution. Instead of having some people you can depend on and talk to and let them know that you're okay, that they care about you. And that's the main thing I want to say is I care about you. And I made up a couple of T-shirts that said, life is a team sport. And it's interesting because we all come in this world as individuals, but we read the Bible, it says it's not good to be alone. So we need to find ways to associate with others. In a metro area, it's usually pretty easy. In fact, these veteran service organizations, although you may not want to go drinking with a whole bunch of people, but maybe just meet some friends in a bar, whatever, but some ways to associate. But the thing is, with a small town, it may be difficult to find a mentor, to find some people to associate with, to spend some time with, to develop a hobby, to find some things to do.
Yeah, one of the things that I can think of too is, when you get out of the military, especially if you were at combat, and then you get out, you don't have that, that brotherhood anymore. Then yeah, it's kind of like, you can feel isolated, you against the world, like you had mentioned, army of one kind of a thing. That was actually the motto when I joined, which just irritated me. That's neither here nor there, really. It's the isolation factor of when you get out you're not talking to the same circle of people, so you don't have people that can, that have gone through what you've gone through. Whether you're deployed or not, military service is its own animal. And that can cause feelings of, helplessness or other things, because you just feel isolated from everything else that, nobody knows what I went through. It's going to be hard for anybody to relate to you.
Yeah, I was chair of our PTSD working group for a few years in Veterans for Peace, and an interesting story about young person at a party with a bunch of friends or whatever, and they come over to him. Well, tell us about what it was like in the Army, and he starts telling them about what it was like in the Army, and they say, I think I got to be going now, because what you have in your memory and what you're telling, they don't really want to hear. It's, I'm Vietnam era, obviously, but that was when we went through the baby killer scene or whatever, that you did some things. Maybe, and hopefully you are obeying orders and doing what was legally yours to do. But it's a little bit shocking to the civilian what your world is really like. So that's why it's so difficult to seek out people you can share that with, that will not be judgmental, will be understanding, and not say, well, what in the heck did you do that for? Say, oh, tell me about it. What was it like? What do you feel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Hollywood really doesn't get things right a lot of the time when it comes to military movies.
Yeah, we have this hero and this star mentality or whatever, but there's a bunch of grunts, and from what my age, and even for combat, there's a bunch of downtime, a lot of boring time. But it's hard to relate to. That's why we're kind of a fraternity. Like I said, I'm Army, you're Navy, or vice versa. In fact, I was just thinking back. The Army-Navy football game used to be the biggest football game of the year, even back before the bowl games, because these guys that left home to go in the military, first time they've been away from home, now they go into Europe or the Pacific or whatever, and they had this great loyalty to their service. And so I think it was Thanksgiving Day and Soldier Field in Philadelphia. They had this game every year, and people yelling and screaming for their service. It's we're really kind of past that now, because we're kind of melding all together in the military. The Air Force flies, but Navy flies. Army has helicopters there flying. Coast Guard is flying stuff. Of course, I was Navy, but there were Marines who were on board ship. And of course, Marines and Army are both land-based. So we can talk to people in the other services, I think, and get along pretty well. But the fact is, having someone to talk to can be so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you think that these factors, that the things of the people don't understand, I really can't talk about this, I lose friends if I talk about this. You think a lot of that contributes to the suicide rates among veterans and mental health issues in general?
Yeah, the tunnel vision, but you're right. The people, in fact, looking back in Vietnam, it seemed like all the bad people, bad characters in all the movies were all the Vietnam veterans. There was kind of a subtle discrimination that, they were all the people that were killing people. They're bad. And maybe if they went to work in my plant, maybe they'll start killing people. Of course, we had a little post office stuff going on there for a while. So, it's been hard. Although I will say there are companies now, I think, that give veterans special treatment, special hiring opportunities. In fact, I have friends work for the post office, which doesn't necessarily mean you should go to work for the post office, but you may seek out places that are friendly to veterans. And I think society is pretty sympathetic to us, but they just don't understand. So, give them time and, give them an opportunity to get to know you and just ask them for the grace to give you an opportunity to prove yourself to them.
Yeah, I think it's gotten a lot better lately with, people understand a little more now that veterans of the Vietnam era were mistreated coming out. There was a lot of anti-war stuff going on in the 60s and early 70s that didn't really help for the veterans. But I think it's gotten a lot better recently. There are quite a few companies now that are, look to hire veterans because they realize that there are, some real skills, especially leadership skills, that a lot of people get while in the military.
Yeah, I remember in the airports about 20 years ago, of course, a lot of servicemen then would be in uniform and they get applauded and, people would stand up and cheer. I'm kind of glad we're past that. I don't think people travel in uniform very much anymore. Although it's interesting, camo is kind of these subtle sign that you're military, whatever. Even lady with a camo purse, or of course, I don't think you should have a camo dog, but there's little subtle things that those of us, as I said, in this fraternity understand and seeing each other.
Yeah, I agree that a lot of this the situation that makes it difficult for veterans these days really comes down to the not knowing how to relate, not knowing what to do in civilian life. And then they end up sometimes turning to drugs if they don't have somebody to talk to, somebody to help. I think that's what leads to a lot of the issues that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and realizing that you need help, as I said, especially if you're in a small town, you're not close to a VA, what resources there might be to have someone to talk to, maybe a church pastor, but maybe just a clerk in the hardware store. Just as you get around and talk to people, you may have someone with a sympathetic ear that you can find that will be a help to you. Because there's going to be times you have a problem and you need to find out who you can talk to. Of course, as I said, it may just be your journal. Just it's interesting to become a powerful device to, of course, we used to call it a diary, but to write your thoughts down maybe at the end of the day or just when you're troubled. It's amazing. Sometimes that may help you bring insights that may help you with your problem.
Mm-hmm. So kind of furthering that a little bit, when it comes to potential, effective support systems, interventions and housing programs that can help prevent, veteran suicides and homelessness, kind of what are your opinions on possible solutions for that?
And one thing I'd mention about homelessness, because it was interesting, I was out at one of my protests last weekend, and two kids, young man and woman, were looking at some of my stuff or whatever and speaking a different language. And I didn't, I normally understand a little bit of Spanish, but I didn't. But it turned out they were from Chile, and but they were apparently homeless. And I said, because I think the young man was kind of proud that he didn't have to work. But the thing of it is, if you really get homeless and you get down to your luck and you get dirty and this, that, and the other, it's very hard to come back, to find somebody to get a job. Because if you have a hamburger joint or whatever, you don't want somebody behind the counter that doesn't look good. So you really can't get down that far. Okay, yeah, there may be times that you have to change jobs or you maybe get fired. I've had some bad experiences in employment, but you need to get back on your feet. Maybe you have to couch surf for a while with a friend, but that homeless life is not a very good life. And I'm kind of sad that, unfortunately, we have some professional beggars and things like that. But try to find regular work and try to. It's something. It's your self-esteem that you're doing well.
There's a note here regarding tiny house villages around Tacoma. I didn't know what that was in there for. If that's something we're going to talk about later on, but I can rephrase things.
Yeah, I think it was 10 or 15 years ago. I ran into this village down in Olympia called Quixote Village, and I think it was a program of the state. And I think it was about 30 of these small homes. I think everybody has seen these pictures of these small homes now. But of course, they were clustered around a central home that had a kitchen and showers, a washer, dryer, and a conference room where you could meet with a counselor. And also they could have AA meetings and things like that. But it was kind of for the general population. They had, I believe, a couple veterans out of the 30 or whatever. But the heck of it is, in these veterans programs, they will give them a check or whatever to go to some apartment and get a room. But if you have a flashback and 2 or 3 in the morning and start yelling and screaming, you're not going to be very popular. And the other apartment dwellers can say, "Get this person out of here. This is ridiculous." But if you're with all veterans, they understand. And somebody will come over and knock on your door and say, "Joe, let's talk about it. Calm down. Everything's going to be okay." So in this little town called Ording out of Tacoma, and they established this village about 3 years ago with about 30 homes, I believe. And I think they just started one over in Shelton. That's a little different there. I guess I would call them a quadplex, 4 units with common walls, but still all veterans, but to keep the cost down. And I think they're just in the process of opening. But it's an interesting program. Obviously, it's small scale at this point. And it's obviously not going to be the complete solution for veterans. But I think it's some common ideas about veterans living together in a location, supporting each other. I think in Ording, they say a VA counselor can come out and then have sessions with several different veterans that day. So, yeah, I think it's a step in the right direction. And I think we're looking at other possibilities too, but it's something I'm very proud to be a part of.
That's very interesting, these tiny homes. We actually interviewed someone a couple of months ago who was talking about starting a tiny home community for veterans. I think it's a great idea to have that support sort of built into your community. And of course, having friends and family, if possible, if you have those, I think they can better support veterans who are struggling with suicidal thoughts and just not sure what to do. So having that community support, the groups, AA, if there's transportation available to them, that would be great. Do you think there's enough public awareness, community involvement in kind of taking care of these issues, or is there anything else we might be able to do?
Well, I think the main thing is other veterans that they can talk to. I think we can remember stories of World War II. The troops came back from Europe in troop ships. So they had about a month to decompress and talk to other veterans about what their experiences were, whatever. And by the time they unloaded back in the States, they deprogrammed quite a bit. And I think a lot of healing to the PTSD type symptoms. But right now we fly a plane back and 12 hours later you're back home, but you haven't deprogrammed. So yeah, to me the key is finding people to talk to, and yeah, if it can be in a community where you're with other people, but otherwise, as I was saying earlier, find people in your community that you can talk to when you need someone to talk to.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I've talked about that previously in another episode as well, about they just drop you off, like you're in another country one day, you're at home the next, and they just kind of drop you off and say, well, enjoy, be on your way. And I think that we really need to do more for veterans on the way out of service to basically do like they used to do on the troop ships coming home, where they have somebody to talk to for a while, get the counseling they need. I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing is, as I was saying, you drop back home, and a lot of your high school friends have gone different directions. You may have been on the high school football team, and that was your identity, and you're not that anymore. And the other thing is, don't get married too quick. Get to know someone. because I think we will all realize there's a lot of divorces going around. Because a lot of times, especially if you married someone, just before you deploy, and you're gone for a couple of years, they learn how to live without you. And the kids are listening to what mom says, and dad comes back home, and we start arguing and this, that, and the other, and little fighting and stuff. And you're not the guy that left. And and I had this buddy, Ralph, who was real nice to me while you were gone. These divorces happen. So don't get married too quick. Make sure, as I said, you work on your issues first. Get yourself straightened out. Give yourself time to know someone. Just going to bed isn't the answer. And that's a big problem in our society, that we think sex and love are the same thing, but they're not really. They can be something very comforting, but you need to work on the communication, the sympathy, the understanding, and respect of that other person. And realize you don't always get your way. We have to learn how to compromise, learn how to raise a family together. Difficult things sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So kind of like, I guess, what do you think are some ways, like if, individuals or organizations, wanted to get involved in supporting veterans who are, at risk of these things that we talk about? What are some ways that, people can kind of get involved without, I guess, intruding too much? Because some random person out of the blue is, asking somebody their whole story might not be the best way to go about it. But, what do you think are some ways people can help?
That's a great suggestion, Chris. People need to understand more about suicide. It's swept under the rug in our society. We think if we ignore it, it'll go away. But it's a huge problem. In fact, speaking of being, my liberal anti-war guy down on the waterfront, being a peacenik, and I have an anti-gun sign, this conservative guy said, well, I have to have a gun because this minority guy is going to sneak up behind me and kill me. I said, oh, really? Do you know you're twice as likely to kill yourself as you are somebody else? The suicide rate is twice the homicide rate. I was so shocked to learn that. But as I said, we come upon a problem, we don't know how to deal with it. We think the only solution is to take our life, and so many times we do. And it's unfortunate when there's a gun handy. It makes it a lot more final than swallowing some pills or slashing a wrist that can be tended to. But the main thing is, all of us had first aid training where we are in Boy Scouts or in school or at work or whatever, how to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and how to stop bleeding in a major wound. But very few of us have heard about the warning signs of suicide. When you say, I don't care about my life anymore. I start giving away my treasured possessions, things like that, the 1,000-yard stare. We really need to be trained in things like that, that it would be so good if like a church group or a school group or a work group could say, hey, let's have someone come in and talk to us about suicide. Because the main thing is realizing that it can happen. Oh, and another old wives' tale is, well, if you ask them if they feel like committing suicide, they'll just bring up the question in their mind, and it really be more likely. Au contraire, just the opposite. The fact that if you ask them if they're considering suicide shows that you care about them, because that's the big problem. I'm in a city of about 300,000, and so often I feel like I'm all alone. No one cares about me. I don't have any friends. So someone, if maybe just in the parking lot, that's kind of standing there, are you okay? Is there anything I can do? Can be a big help. On another idea, and it kind of came out of COVID, these first responders, checkout person at the store or the stock or whatever, they all have a name tag. Greet them with their name sometime. Oh, Shelley, thank you very much for helping me check out today. You don't realize how powerful that can be because we lead these thankless lives. No one ever thanks us for doing anything, even though we're there for 40 hours of the week. We feel like no one cares. But just hearing someone say your name can be so powerful. So glad you helped me today, Chris. You're a great person. Little things like that, as I said, life is a team sport. But we assume that, I just do my own thing, you do your own thing, that we need to find ways to help other people.
And anybody who might be considering suicide, try and take a step, call a friend, talk to somebody, call the suicide hotline, something, because there is help. There are people who care.
Yeah, anything to slow them down. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about tomorrow. I know what's happened is really troubling to you, and I know you're very upset. Oh, and another clue for you today, because it's very tempting to say, are you okay? And every time you meet somebody, say, are you okay? They'll say, yes, I'm fine. That's automatic. But it's very revealing to say, how are you sleeping? Because almost anyone that's depressed or is suffering from anxiety is not sleeping well. And there's more of a chance that they may answer you honestly if you ask that question. And then that may provide the follow-up about what's bothering you. What can we do about it? Are you talking to a professional? How can we get you some help? Those are ways we can help each other.
Is there anything else that you just want to bring up that we haven't touched on so far before we wrap this up?
I think we've done a pretty good job of covering the waterfront. The main thing, caring about each other, knowing it's awful hard to say to another man that I love you, but that doesn't necessarily mean sexually, but it means I care about you, that I hope for the best for you, and let me know if you have a problem. Here's my phone number. Call me anytime, day or night, if something's troubling you. It's so important that we're all in this together, to use a popular phrase, that I hope if you've heard this today as a veteran or as a family member, you may get some ideas of dealing with a veteran that obviously we all will go through problems in our lives, but we just need these helping hands. And by great of Tom, of you starting this and asking me to be a part of it, I'm glad to help others. It's been a high point in my life.
I'm glad to hear that. We really appreciate you being on here and talking with us. These are important subjects that really need to be discussed, need to be brought up.
My pleasure. I hope we've helped some people.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, I think that's all we have for today. Again, Dave, I thank you for being with us. And Chris and I would be happy to have you, like this video, this podcast, share it with your friends, get this information out there because it's important.
Yep.
People really need to know. So thank you for your time. Thank everybody for listening. And with that, I think that's it. We will see you next time.
Catch you at the next one.
Okay. Bye-bye.